So, imagine this, a 28-year-old guy, let's call him Mike, and his fiancée, Emily, who's 26. They've been together for nearly 6 years. They've talked about the future, the house, kids, all the usual stuff you expect when you're with someone for that long. Everything seems perfect, or at least it did. One night, Mike and Emily were sitting in their cozy apartment, winding down after a long day. It was just the two of them, as usual. But that night, everything was about to change. It started off pretty normal. They had dinner, talked about the day, and Mike was in one of those good moods where everything felt like it was falling into place. The plan was simple. They were going to get married in a few months, start the next chapter of their lives, the whole 9 yards. Then, out of nowhere, Emily drops a bombshell. She looks at him, maybe a little too calmly, and says, "Mike, I think we need to talk." Now, when someone says we need to talk, it's never good. I mean, you know something's off. But Mike? He wasn't ready for what was coming. "You've been great to me," she says, her voice steady, but there's something cold about it. "But I think I'm ready to upgrade." Mike's brain short-circuits for a second. Upgrade? What does that even mean? His heart starts to race, his stomach tightens. Was she talking about something small? Like a new car? Maybe she just needed a new job? But no! No, she wasn't talking about anything small. It's as if time slowed down. Emily kept going, oblivious to the way his world was falling apart in real time. "You know, Mike, I've been thinking a lot lately," she continues. "I'm just not sure we're on the same level anymore. I think it's time for me to be with someone who can give me more. I need someone who can provide better, someone who has more money, more success, someone who can offer me the lifestyle I've always wanted." Mike, totally stunned, sits there, frozen for a moment. Was she serious? Did she just drop that on him? The woman he had planned his entire future with, the woman he thought was the love of his life, telling him that he wasn't good enough anymore? It didn't hit him all at once. It wasn't some dramatic movie scene where everything crashes down in slow motion. It was the quiet kind of betrayal, the kind that wraps its fingers around your throat and slowly tightens. He tried to laugh it off at first, thinking she was joking, or maybe he had misheard her. But no, her eyes were cold. This was real. And what she said next made it all even worse. "I'm leaving you for someone else. Someone who has money. Someone who's more my type now." Mike's stomach churned. There was no way this was happening, right? He had been working his butt off for years, trying to build a life with her, and this was how she was going to repay him? By throwing him aside for someone wealthier? The worst part? He didn't even know who this guy was. She didn't mention him by name. All she said was that he was better for her, that he could give her things Mike just couldn't. He's sitting there, reeling, trying to process this, while she's casually packing her things in the background. He's not even sure what's happening anymore. But here's where it gets really crazy. As Mike's world crumbles around him, Emily's got that same calm, collected look on her face. The same expression she's had for years. It's almost like she'd been planning this for a while, just waiting for the right moment to drop the truth bomb. He's left there, feeling every single second of the weight of her words, as if they're a punch to the gut. And she's still packing. He's still sitting on the couch, trying to make sense of it all, when she finally stops, looks back at him, and says something that stops his heart cold. "By the way, Mike," she says, her voice almost a whisper now, "the guy I'm leaving you for? Yeah, he's a con artist." Wait, what? Mike's mind races even more. He didn't hear that right. A con artist? He's just standing there, not sure if he's dreaming, because how the hell did we go from "I'm upgrading" to "oh, by the way, he's a fraud"? But Emily doesn't seem fazed at all. She's got this look in her eyes like everything's just going according to plan, and maybe, for her, it is. Maybe she's already moved on, already accepted this new chapter of her life with this con artist. But for Mike, it feels like a punch in the face. How did he miss this? How did he miss her changing so drastically? How was he so blindsided by the fact that the woman he loved wasn't even the person he thought she was? This whole thing, everything that Emily just said, felt like one giant, twisted joke. But for Mike, it was far from funny. It was the moment his entire life started falling apart. And he had no idea where it was headed from here. But trust me, things were only just getting started. Mike's head was spinning. He stood there in the middle of the living room, numb, staring at Emily as she finished packing her things. Her calmness was unnerving. How could she act like everything was fine? Like it was just another day? Wasn't she the woman who had promised him a future together? They'd talked about it, dreamed about it. And now? Now she was leaving. For a richer guy. A guy who, apparently, wasn't just successful, he was a con artist. Mike shook his head, trying to make sense of it. It felt like he was in some kind of nightmare, only he couldn't wake up. His whole body was on autopilot as Emily zipped up the last of her bags. "I don't want to talk about him anymore," she said dismissively, as if she was just done with the whole situation. "I've made up my mind." "You should, too." Mike opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Was this really happening? Was he being pranked? He looked around the apartment. It was the same place they built their little life together, where they had laughed, argued, and dreamed. But now, it felt like a ghost town. A shell of what it used to be. "Wait, Emily," he finally managed to say. "You can't just drop this on me and then walk out like it's nothing. You're telling me this guy you're leaving me for, he's a con artist? A fraud?" Emily paused, her hand on the door, and looked back at him. For a brief second, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a hesitation, maybe? But it was gone in a flash, replaced by that cold, calculated look again. "He's different, Mike. And you don't need to worry about him anymore. I'll be fine. I'll be with someone who gets it, who can provide me with everything I need. And you, well, you'll figure it out. We both will." Mike felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. That was it? She was just done? She was leaving him for a guy she knew was a con artist? Wasn't that enough of a red flag for her to stop and rethink everything? But the real sting came after she left. The house felt hollow. His mind wouldn't stop racing, going in circles, replaying everything she'd said. The cruel finality of her words, "I'm upgrading," kept echoing in his head. It wasn't just that she wanted a richer guy. No, it was the fact that she was so unbothered about the fact that she was walking away from him without a second thought. He didn't even know who this guy was. What if Emily was blinded by the money, the glamour, and didn't see the guy for what he truly was? What if she was about to fall into a trap, a web of lies that this con artist had spun? It kept him up at night. 4 days. The more Mike thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place, or rather, the more he realized how many pieces were missing. Emily's sudden shift was one thing. But the fact that she was so blasé about the whole situation made him think something was off. He knew Emily, or at least he thought he did. She wasn't the type to jump into something without knowing all the details. And that's when it hit him. Emily had been so careful with her decisions, so measured in everything she did, right down to the way she planned their wedding, the way she planned their finances. If she was willing to ditch him for someone else without a single shred of doubt, maybe this was all part of a bigger picture. Maybe it wasn't about the money. Maybe she had known all along that this guy wasn't just wealthy, he was a danger. Mike's mind was racing now. He had to figure this out. He had to know more. If Emily was making this huge mistake, he wasn't going to let her walk into it blind. If this guy was a con artist, he needed to find a way to stop it before things got out of hand. So, Mike did what any confused, heartbroken guy would do. He started digging. The first thing he did was try to find out who this new guy was. His name? His background? Anything that might give him a clue as to who the hell Emily had been talking about. But when he Googled the name she'd mentioned, something generic, like Jake Evans, nothing came up. Not a single scrap of information. Not a LinkedIn page, not a social media account, nothing. That didn't make any sense. Surely, a guy who was rich enough to woo Emily away from him should have some kind of online presence, right? At the very least, there had to be a picture, a business profile, or something. Mike was used to being tech-savvy, so he kept digging. He contacted a couple of friends from his old job, people who knew how to look up people, who could find out details that weren't on the surface. But all the people he asked were just as stumped as he was. No one had heard of this guy. In fact, no one seemed to know anything about him at all. And that's when the red flags started to stack up. This guy didn't just not exist in the usual ways, he was deliberately erased from every corner of the internet. The more Mike thought about it, the more unsettling it became. This wasn't a simple situation. Emily was making a massive mistake, and Mike had a feeling he was about to be thrown into something way bigger than just a bad breakup. But what exactly was the danger here? What was this guy after, and how deep did this whole scam go? Mike couldn't shake the feeling that Emily had just walked straight into a trap, and he had no idea how to get her out. Mike couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in his stomach. It was like a cold weight, sinking lower and lower each day since Emily left. The more he tried to distract himself with work or anything that could fill the silence, the more her words came crashing back, louder and more unrelenting. "I'm upgrading." He couldn't escape them. They haunted him, twisted around in his head like a broken record. But what was worse was the fact that Emily, his fiancée, the woman he thought he knew, was now with a guy who wasn't even real. Well, at least not in the way she thought he was. The more Mike tried to learn about this Jake Evans, the more the guy seemed to vanish into thin air. He was starting to feel like some kind of detective, piecing together clues like a puzzle that had pieces intentionally missing. The internet was a ghost town when it came to Jake. No photos, no social media profiles, no professional pages. The only thing Mike could find were vague references to a name that could have been anyone. At first, Mike chalked it up to bad luck. Maybe Emily was just being vague about the guy's background. Maybe he had some kind of secretive job or something. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Emily wasn't the type to date someone without knowing everything about them. Hell, she used to ask him about the smallest details of his past. She always liked to know everything. So why hadn't she dug into this guy more? Why hadn't she asked questions? But then it hit him. What if she did know everything? What if she wasn't just blindly falling for a richer guy? What if she was in on it? Maybe it wasn't just a regular breakup. Maybe, just maybe, Emily had fallen into a trap of her own making. And she didn't even realize it. Mike knew he couldn't just sit back and let it happen. He wasn't the type of guy who would wait for things to unfold on their own. If Emily was walking into a scam, he wasn't going to let her get caught in the middle of it. So, he started digging in places no one would think to look. He talked to a few old colleagues, some of whom had experience in the financial world. One of them, Mark, had a reputation for knowing a thing or two about shady dealings, so Mike figured he'd give him a call. It was a shot in the dark, but Mike was desperate. Mike said when he finally reached him, "I need your help with something. It's personal." "Have you ever heard of a guy named Jake Evans?" There was a pause on the other end of the line before Mark replied, his tone a little too calm. "Jake Evans? What do you want with him?" Mike felt a chill run down his spine. I don't know. That's the problem. I think he's a con artist, and my ex-fiancée is with him now. Mark's response was instant. Is he playing the rich guy act? Fancy cars, expensive dinners, all that? Mike's mind raced. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm hearing. And it's like there's nothing on him. No social media, no job history, nothing. It's like he's a ghost. There was a slight chuckle on the other end. Kid, that's because he's probably not the real Jake Evans. He's just somehow using a fake identity. Trust me, I've seen it happen. Guys like that don't just vanish off the grid, they make sure there's nothing to find. It's all part of the act. Mike felt his blood run cold. So, he's a what? A fraud? Worse, Mark said with a low chuckle. This guy's probably running a whole scheme. He's using your ex as a stepping stone to something bigger. You're dealing with a professional. I wouldn't be surprised if she's not the first woman he's pulled this stunt on. Mike felt like he'd been hit with a ton of bricks. Emily was just another mark? Was this really happening? This guy had played his cards so well that Emily didn't even realize she was being used. And now she was about to fall deeper into this mess. You need to get her out of this, Mark said, his voice serious now. You've got to stop her before she gets in too deep. These guys, they always have a plan. And when they're done with you, they leave nothing behind. Nothing but a broken heart and an empty bank account. Mike's heart raced. What had he gotten himself into? The days started to blur together after that conversation. Mike tried reaching out to Emily, but she was too far gone. Every time he called, she didn't pick up. When he texted, she ignored him. It was like she was living in some fantasy world with Jake, and nothing he said or did would change that. Mike couldn't let go of the fact that Emily was so sure about this guy. She had to know something was off, right? Wasn't she the one who had always been skeptical about everything? The woman who questioned every purchase, every decision? But now she was in too deep. That's when he realized something else. Maybe this wasn't just about Emily being duped. Maybe this was about him too. Maybe he had been blind to her changing behavior for a lot longer than he realized. The signs were there, he just didn't see them. She had started acting distant before the breakup, always too busy with her work, always distracted when they were together. She'd always pushed him to be more successful, to be someone he wasn't. And he thought it was just her trying to motivate him. But now I felt like she had always been setting him up to fail. Mike knew what he had to do next. He wasn't going to sit around and wait for this mess to unravel on its own. Emily might be lost in this dream world with Jake, but Mike was going to find the truth. He was going to figure out who this guy really was, and if Emily wouldn't listen to him, he'd make her see the truth, no matter how hard it was. The clock was ticking, and Mike was determined to get to the bottom of it before it was too late. Mike had been tracking Emily's every move, quietly watching her from the sidelines as she slipped deeper into the world of Jake Evans. He had to admit, it was getting under his skin. Every Instagram post, every story, every happy smile she shared with this mysterious, perfect guy, it was like a dagger to the chest. He knew something was wrong, knew that Jake wasn't who he seemed to be, but it was like trying to catch smoke with his bare hands. Emily was gone. Gone from the life he thought they were building. And now she was falling for a man who was nothing more than a well-crafted illusion. He had spent the last week piecing together what little information he could find on Jake, no easy task. There was no trace of him online, no public profiles, no job history. It was like the man didn't even exist before he'd met Emily. And then Mike had a thought, a terrifying thought. What if this wasn't just a scam? What if this was part of a bigger game, one that was bigger than he could have ever imagined? It was early evening when Mike made up his mind. He wasn't going to wait around anymore. He wasn't going to be the guy who sat in the shadows, waiting for the inevitable train wreck. He had to confront Emily. And not in the quiet, passive way he'd been doing for weeks. This time, he was going to drag the truth out of her. He was done pretending. He showed up at her apartment, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure how he was going to handle it, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't walking away without the truth. The moment he rang the doorbell, his palms were slick with sweat, his mind racing with every possible scenario. Would she let him in? Would she even talk to him? What if she still didn't believe him? What if she was too far gone? The door opened. Emily stood there, her expression unreadable. It wasn't the warm greeting he'd once expected, but rather a cold stare that sent a shiver down his spine. "What are you doing here, Mike?" she asked, her voice flat. "I need to talk to you." "About Jake," he said, his words coming out faster than he intended. "I need you to listen to me. Please." She sighed, stepping aside to let him in, though her reluctance was evident. The apartment was different now, empty in a way that unsettled him. The little things they used to share, the photos of them together, the trinkets from their travels, all of it was gone. Replaced by something colder, something that didn't feel like home anymore. He didn't belong here. He hadn't for a long time. "You're still stuck on this, aren't you?" Emily said, folding her arms across her chest. "I've told you, Mike, I'm happy. You should be happy for me too." Mike shook his head, frustration bubbling over. "You think you're happy? You think this is real?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice, now desperate. "This guy you're with, he's not who you think he is. I've been looking into him. He's a con artist. You're being played, Emily." The words hung in the air between them. For a moment, Emily didn't respond. Her eyes flickered, but she didn't break. Mike could feel his chest tighten with the weight of the truth he was trying to shove in front of her. She wasn't listening. She wasn't even processing what he was saying. The walls were up again. The walls she'd put up the moment she left him for Jake. "He's a fake. There's no record of him, Emily. Nothing. No history, no job, no family. It's like he doesn't exist. He's using you to get what he wants, and once he's done with you, he'll leave you with nothing." Her face twitched. That's when he saw it. The slightest crack in the armor. For a split second, her eyes betrayed her. Maybe she was finally listening. Maybe she was starting to hear him. "Mike, I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. But even as she said the words, Mike could see the doubt creeping in. The tiniest crack, like a spiderweb forming in her perfect little world. "Think about it, Emily," he urged, his voice low but intense. "Everything he's shown you, everything you've seen, has been a show. It's all designed to make you believe he's something he's not. And you've fallen for it." The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. Mike took a step back, trying to give her some space to breathe. His chest was tight with a mix of anger, desperation, and something else, fear. Fear that it was too late, that Emily was already too far gone to see what was in front of her. But then, just as he was about to give up, she looked down, almost like she was searching for something. "I don't want to believe you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But what if you're right?" Mike's heart skipped. Was this it? Was this the crack in the armor he'd been waiting for? "Emily, I need you to trust me. This guy is using you. I've seen this before. I've seen it happen to other people, and they end up broken. You don't deserve that." Tears started to form in her eyes. "But I love him, Mike. I thought I loved you too. But now, I'm not so sure." It hit him like a punch to the gut. Was this how it ended? Not with fireworks or epic confrontations, but with quiet words that shattered everything he thought he knew about her? She wasn't just falling for a con artist, she was doubting everything they'd built together. Mike didn't know what to say next. He could see the pain in her eyes, the realization creeping in. She was starting to understand. But was it too late? Before he could speak again, Emily took a shaky breath and wiped away a tear. I don't know what to do anymore. The silence between them was deafening. The silence between Mike and Emily hung in the air like a thick fog, each second feeling like an eternity. Mike's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know if this was the turning point, or if it was just another false alarm, another empty hope that would fizzle out as quickly as it had started. But the look in Emily's eyes? The way she was trembling just slightly, as if she was fighting against something inside her, he knew this wasn't over yet. Emily, please, he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. I didn't come here to make you feel bad. I need you to see what's really going on. You're caught in this fantasy, and I can't just watch you walk into something that's gonna break you. She shook her head, wiping her eyes. I don't know how to fix this, Mike. I want to believe you. I really do. But I've already chosen him. I don't know if I can walk away from that now. Mike's mind was racing. He had to fight through the haze of doubt that was clouding her thoughts. The woman he once knew wasn't the one standing in front of him now. This was someone who was trying to untangle herself from a web of lies, someone who couldn't see a way out. He took a step closer, gently but firmly. You haven't chosen anything yet. You can walk away. But you need to open your eyes. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, Emily. I'm telling you this because I care about you. And this guy? He's already taking you for a ride. Emily looked away, biting her lip, like she was trying to hold onto something that was slipping through her fingers. Mike could see it now. She was questioning everything. She wasn't just questioning Jake anymore. She was questioning herself, her decisions, everything that had brought her here. For a moment, she stood there, frozen. Then, in a small, barely audible voice, she spoke. I don't know what's real anymore, Mike. That was it. The opening he'd been waiting for. Mike's heart did a strange flip as he realized what was at stake. Emily wasn't just doubting Jake. She was doubting her own choices, her own judgment. And if he could show her the truth, maybe, just maybe, he could save her from walking deeper into this mess. Look, Mike said, sitting down across from her, keeping his voice calm and level. I know this feels huge. And I know you've been through a lot, but you can't let this guy pull you into his game. You've got a good heart, Emily. You deserve more than someone who's just using you to fill his pockets or whatever his endgame is. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling as she wiped her face again. It wasn't just the doubt that was clouding her now, it was the grief. The kind of grief that comes when you realize you've been played, when you've built something up only to watch it come crashing down. Mike could see that she wasn't just broken by Jake's lies, but by her own choices. It hurt. A lot. I can't believe I was so stupid, she whispered, almost to herself. How could I not see it? I knew something was off. But I just kept ignoring it. Mike took a deep breath. This was his moment, and he couldn't let it slip away. You're not stupid, Emily. You're human. And this guy? He's a pro. He knows exactly what to say, exactly what to do. He's got you in his sights. But you're smarter than this. I know you are. She let out a shaky breath, wiping her eyes one more time. I thought I was making the right choice. I thought this was what I wanted. Sometimes, we make choices based on the wrong reasons, Mike said softly. but that doesn't mean you're stuck with them. You can change your mind. You can start over. Emily was silent for a long moment, just staring at the floor as if trying to piece everything together. Mike sat there, waiting, giving her the space she needed. He wasn't rushing her. He knew better than anyone that you can't force someone to see the truth, they have to be ready. Finally, she looked up at him, her expression soft but steady. I don't know what to do next, Mike. I'm so lost. Mike leaned forward, his voice firm but kind. The first step? Leave him. Leave Jake. Don't waste another minute with someone who's using you. Emily nodded, her lips trembling. She was struggling, fighting with herself. But Mike could see the shift happening in her eyes. The fog was starting to lift. I don't even know how to do that, she admitted, her voice breaking. I don't know how to let go. You don't have to do it alone, Mike said, his voice softening. I'm not asking you to jump back into anything with me. But I'll be here for you. You don't have to walk away from him and be on your own. She looked at him for a long time, as if weighing his words, as if trying to decide whether to trust him again. Then, finally, she nodded. I'll leave him, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to be with someone who's lying to me. I don't want to be used anymore. Mike's heart raced. He wasn't sure what would happen next. Hell, he wasn't even sure where this left them, but for the first time in a long while, he felt hope. I'm proud of you, he said softly, looking her in the eye. You'll figure it out. One step at a time. And for the first time in months, Emily managed a small, fragile smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A sign that maybe, just maybe, she was finally taking control of her life again. Maybe, this time, she was going to be okay. And Mike? He wasn't giving up on her just yet. But he knew, deep down, that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But it was a road they'd have to walk together.